Emily Roberts had always believed that love, when true, could conquer everything. She had been raised to see marriage as a sacred bond, one built on trust, patience, and shared dreams. So, when she met Mark, charming, ambitious, and full of grand ideas, she thought she had found her forever. He spoke to her in a way no one else ever had, painting visions of the future with confident strokes, promising her a life full of purpose and success. In the beginning, Emily saw only what she wanted to see, the potential in him, not the flaws hidden behind his charm. Mark had a dream, to start his own dry cleaning business. His enthusiasm was contagious. Emily, who had saved $12,000 from years of hard work, didn't hesitate to invest it all into his vision. "It's our dream now," she told him, smiling with innocent faith. At first, things seemed perfect. Mark would talk endlessly about expansion plans and success stories, while Emily managed the accounts, took care of customers, and handled the little details that made the business run smoothly. But as the months went by, the warmth began to fade. Mark's words became colder, his gaze distant. It started with small things: a harsh tone, an impatient sigh, a dismissive gesture. When she asked about their plans, he would snap, "You wouldn't understand the business side of things, Emily." When she tried to help, he would accuse her of interfering. Slowly, Emily found herself walking on eggshells around the man she once adored. And then came the cruelest cut, the words that shattered her from within. "You know what the real problem is?" he had said one night, his voice slurred from whiskey. "You can't even give me a child. What kind of woman are you?" Emily froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been to doctors. She had cried silently over test results that showed no medical reason for infertility. She had begged him to go for tests himself, but he always refused. Now she realized why. He wasn't just cruel, he was a coward. Days turned into months, and the emotional abuse grew heavier. Mark would disappear for nights, returning with vague excuses and the scent of perfume that wasn't hers. He mocked her cooking, insulted her family, and turned their home into a battlefield. Yet Emily, bound by the hope that love could still save them, endured it all, until the day she found the receipt. It was tucked inside his jacket pocket, an expensive diamond bracelet from a boutique she could never afford, addressed to someone named Sophia. Her hands trembled as she held it. The reality hit her like a wave of ice. Her husband was having an affair. That night, Emily didn't scream. She didn't throw things or beg for answers. She simply looked at him with the calm of someone whose soul had reached its limit. "Is she worth my $12,000 too?" she asked quietly. Mark stared at her, momentarily speechless. His arrogance faltered for a second, but then his lips curved into that same cold smirk. "Don't turn this into drama, Emily. You should be grateful for what you have. I built this life." "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I built this with you, and you destroyed it." That was the night Emily packed her bags. No shouting, no tears, just silence. She walked out of that house and into the unknown, her entire world collapsing behind her. For weeks, she lived in a small rented apartment, eating little, sleeping less. The quiet was unbearable at first. She had spent years defining herself through Mark's approval. Now she didn't even know who she was. But pain, she discovered, has a strange way of purifying the soul. One morning, while walking through the city, she saw a group of women standing outside a community center, laughing, confident, alive. A banner above them read, "Women's Empowerment Workshop." Something in Emily stirred. She walked in, hesitant but curious, and listened to women share stories of survival, courage, and rediscovery. Each voice was a mirror, reflecting her own pain back at her, but also showing her the light beyond it. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel alone. She began to rebuild, not just her finances but her identity. She took evening courses in business management, worked part-time at a bakery, and slowly started saving again. Every day was a small victory. She wrote in her journal, reminding herself, "You are not broken. You are becoming." Months later, when the divorce papers finally came through, Emily didn't cry. She signed them with steady hands and whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." She kept her wedding ring in a small box, not as a token of love lost, but as a reminder of the woman she used to be. The naive girl who gave everything to someone who didn't deserve it, and the woman who finally chose herself. By the end of that year, Emily stood taller, spoke clearer, and smiled more. She no longer looked back with bitterness, only with gratitude, because through the fire, she had found her strength. Years passed, and the name Mark Roberts no longer haunted Emily's nights. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes, not just as a survivor, but as a woman of dignity and grace. Her life was no longer defined by pain. It was guided by purpose. She had remarried, not out of need, but out of love. Daniel was everything Mark had never been, kind, patient, and quietly strong. Where Mark's words had cut like knives, Daniel's presence healed without trying. Together, they built a peaceful home, full of laughter and warmth. Emily was now a proud mother of 3 daughters, bright, curious, and compassionate. Her world revolved around them, and in their eyes, she saw her reason to keep moving forward. Life had found its rhythm again. Emily had opened a small catering business from her kitchen, which quickly blossomed into a successful venture. Her clients admired her professionalism, her food, and her calm confidence. It was as though every wound had turned into wisdom, every scar a silent badge of strength. Then one morning, while sorting through her mail, she found a heavy, cream-colored envelope. It bore elegant gold lettering. "Mr. and Mrs. Mark Roberts cordially invite you to their wedding celebration." For a long time, Emily simply stared at it. The name felt foreign now, like a ghost from another lifetime. Her first reaction was disbelief. Then a faint ironic smile curved her lips. The man who had once sworn she was unworthy of love was now getting married again. Daniel found her holding the invitation, her face unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, setting it down. "Yes, just surprised. Do you want to go?" he asked, half teasing, half concerned. She looked out the window, her reflection calm. "Yes," she said at last. "I think I do. It wasn't about revenge, not anymore." She wanted closure, to face the man who once tried to break her and show him that she was unbroken. The day of the wedding was bright and elegant. The venue, a luxurious ballroom draped in ivory silk, glittered with chandeliers and expensive smiles. Emily entered gracefully, dressed in a midnight blue gown that shimmered under the lights. Daniel walked beside her, holding her hand with quiet pride. Heads turned as she passed. She radiated poise, a beauty born of resilience. When Mark saw her across the room, his expression faltered. For a fleeting moment, his composure cracked. The woman he had once dismissed as fragile stood before him now with a confidence that outshone everyone else in the room. "Emily, I didn't think you'd come," he muttered when they finally crossed paths. She smiled softly. "You invited me, didn't you?" Before he could reply, a delicate voice interrupted. "Mark, darling, who's this?" It was Sophia, the new bride, beautiful, polished, and radiating the same arrogance Emily had once seen in Mark's eyes. She slipped her arm through his possessively, her gaze scanning Emily from head to toe. "Oh," Sophia said, realization dawning. "You're Emily." Her tone carried the subtle sweetness of someone who enjoyed superiority. "I've heard so much about you." "I'm sure you have," Emily replied calmly, her smile unfaltering. The ceremony went on, filled with laughter, toasts, and glittering facades. But when the speeches began, Sophia took the stage, holding the microphone with a mischievous grin. "I just want to say how grateful I am," she began. "Mark and I believe every person teaches us something in life. For example, his ex-wife, bless her heart, taught him what he didn't want." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the hall. Sophia continued, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Some women just aren't meant for motherhood or marriage. But we all grow, don't we?" The words struck like daggers, but Emily didn't flinch. Her daughters, sitting nearby, watched her carefully. And in that moment, she knew silence was no longer strength. She rose from her seat and walked to the stage, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The room fell silent. Even Sophia blinked, startled. "May I?" Emily asked, gesturing for the microphone. Sophia hesitated, but Mark, perhaps sensing what was coming, handed it over reluctantly. Emily's voice was calm, steady, and piercingly clear. "You're right, Sophia. We all grow. Some of us grow through pain, some through truth, and some only through shame." A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. She turned toward the audience. "Years ago, I invested everything I had, $12,000, into a dream that wasn't mine. I believed in a man who promised love but delivered cruelty. He told me I couldn't have children." She paused, looking directly at Mark. "But, as you can see," she said, glancing toward her daughters, "that was a lie." Whispers filled the hall. Mark's face turned pale. Emily opened her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "These," she said, "are medical reports from the time we were married. They show the truth he hid from everyone. The truth that he was the one who couldn't father a child." Gasps echoed. Sophia's face drained of color. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," Emily continued softly. "I'm here because truth deserves a voice. I carried his shame for years, thinking it was mine. Today, I'm leaving it where it belongs." She handed the envelope to Sophia, who stared at it in disbelief. The hall was silent, not out of shock, but out of respect. Even the band had stopped playing. Emily placed the microphone down and smiled gently. "I wish you both the best," she said simply, and turned to leave. As she walked away, applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then thunderous. It wasn't for revenge or drama. It was for courage. That night, when Emily and Daniel drove home under the quiet stars, he looked at her with admiration. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," he said. "You stood up for every woman who's ever been silenced." Emily smiled faintly, watching the city lights blur past. "It wasn't revenge," she whispered. "It was justice." That night marked a turning point. The story of Emily Roberts spread far beyond that ballroom. People spoke not of her pain, but of her grace, how she faced her past without hatred, how she turned humiliation into honor. And somewhere, in the wreckage of his own pride, Mark finally realized what he had lost. Not just a woman, but a legacy of strength he could never replace. In the weeks following that unforgettable wedding, Emily's world began to shift in quiet but meaningful ways. The video of her speech had gone viral. Guests had recorded it, and soon, strangers across the country were talking about the woman who had faced her ex-husband with dignity instead of fury. Journalists wrote articles calling her the woman who redefined strength, and women from all walks of life began reaching out to her online, thanking her for giving them courage. At first, Emily felt overwhelmed. She hadn't spoken that night to make headlines or inspire movements. She had simply told the truth. But now, she realized that truth, when spoken with grace, has a power greater than revenge. It heals others, not just oneself. Mark, on the other hand, was living through the consequences of his own pride. The exposure of his deceit spread quickly, and the empire he had built on lies began to crumble. Clients withdrew, his reputation shattered, and Sophia, unable to bear the public humiliation, filed for divorce within months. For the first time in his life, Mark stood alone, stripped of all illusion. Meanwhile, Emily's business continued to grow. The catering company she had built with her bare hands evolved into something larger, a restaurant called Nourish. The name reflected her vision, to create not just food, but comfort. She wanted her restaurant to be a place where people could heal through warmth, community, and compassion. Daniel supported her every step of the way, managing finances, organizing events, and reminding her to rest when she worked too hard. The grand opening of Nourish was magical. The air smelled of roasted herbs and fresh bread. Soft music played in the background as guests filled the cozy space. Emily stood by the entrance welcoming everyone with her serene smile. Many of her early customers were women she had once met at that community center. Women who, like her, had risen from pain to power. They hugged her, cried, and told her how proud they were. When the mayor of the town attended and asked Emily to say a few words, she hesitated for a moment, then stepped up to the small stage. "I used to think strength meant never falling apart," she began, her voice gentle but steady. "But I've learned that real strength is found in rebuilding, in standing up again when life has broken you down. We all go through storms. What matters is not who hurt us, but who we become afterward." The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. Over time, Nourish became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol. Emily started holding weekend workshops in a small corner of the cafe, inviting women to share their stories, learn business skills, and find emotional support. What began as a handful of attendees soon grew into a full-fledged movement. Emily called it Rise Again. Every month she invited speakers, therapists, and entrepreneurs, women who had faced betrayal, abuse, or loss, to come forward and guide others through their journeys. She taught them how to start small businesses, manage finances, and reclaim their confidence. Her life now had a higher purpose, not to erase her past, but to transform it into light for others. Daniel often watched her from across the room, quietly amazed. "Do you ever miss the old life?" He once asked her late at night as they closed the restaurant. Emily smiled thoughtfully, wiping her hands with a cloth. "No," she said, "because that version of me had to exist so that this one could be born. But life, even in peace, has its tests." One afternoon, while Emily was reviewing invoices, her assistant came rushing into the office. "Emily, there's someone outside asking for you. He says it's urgent." When she stepped into the main hall, she froze. It was Mark. He looked nothing like the man she once knew. His hair streaked with gray, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired and hollow. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by something close to regret. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling, "I didn't know where else to go." For a moment, Emily said nothing. The memories came flooding back, the humiliation, the cruelty, the years of silence. But instead of anger, she felt only distance. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked quietly. I lost everything," he admitted, his voice breaking. "My business, my home, my reputation. I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to say it. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Emily studied him carefully. She could see the pain etched into his face, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Once, she would have given anything to hear that apology. Now, she realized she didn't need it. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said softly. "Not for your sake, but for mine." He looked at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "How can you be so calm after everything I did?" "Because forgiveness isn't about freeing you," she said. "It's about freeing myself." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "You're a better person than I ever deserved." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm not better. Just wiser." She gestured toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Mark." He nodded, lowering his gaze, and walked out into the fading sunlight. For a moment, Emily stood there, watching him disappear down the street. Not with hate, not even pity, but with peace. The chapter had closed. Truly, this time. Months later, Emily received an unexpected letter. It was from a law firm, Mark's attorney. Inside was a notice stating that Mark had legally transferred his remaining business shares to her, along with a short, handwritten note. "You were always the real builder. Maybe now you can use what's left to build something good." Emily sat quietly for a long while after reading it. Then she smiled and folded the paper neatly. That evening, she called her accountant and instructed him to liquidate the assets. A week later, she donated every cent, $400,000, to 3 organizations that helped divorced and abused women rebuild their lives. When Daniel heard about it, he looked at her with quiet admiration. "You could have kept that money," he said. Emily shook her head, her eyes shining. "I already have everything I need." That night, as she lay in bed, the world outside calm and still, Emily whispered a silent prayer. Not of revenge, not of triumph, but of gratitude. For every heartbreak that had shaped her, for every lesson disguised as loss. She understood now that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of purpose. And in that peace, Emily Roberts finally found herself. Time flowed gently yet purposefully in Emily's life. Her restaurant Nourish had become a sanctuary, a place where stories of triumph and resilience intertwined with the aroma of fresh bread and simmering sauces. The business had grown far beyond her initial expectations, not just as a culinary venture but as a hub of empowerment for women. Emily had always believed that healing required community, and she had created one that embraced courage, compassion, and collaboration. Through her program Rise Again, she held workshops every weekend. Women from different walks of life, single mothers, divorcees, survivors of abuse, gathered to share their stories, exchange skills, and find strength in numbers. Emily spoke from experience, weaving her journey of heartbreak and betrayal into lessons of courage, financial independence, and self-respect. She encouraged them to reclaim their voices, to define themselves not by the men who wronged them, but by the lives they dared to lead. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered through the restaurant's wide windows, Emily watched a group of young women discussing business plans over coffee and pastries. Their laughter, tentative at first but growing confident, reminded her of her own early steps into independence. Daniel, ever her partner in life and business, stood beside her, smiling quietly. He had grown used to these moments where he realized just how far Emily had come, not just in success, but in impact. Emily had also begun to travel, accepting invitations to speak at conferences and seminars. She was no longer just a restaurant owner or a survivor. She had become a voice of inspiration. Her talks were powerful, not because of grandiose language, but because of the authenticity that radiated from her words. When someone tries to break you, she would tell her audiences, don't ask yourself why it happened. Ask yourself what you will build from it. Strength is not in vengeance. It is in rising again, wiser, stronger, and freer than before. The audiences were captivated, often moved to tears. Women approached her afterward, sharing their fears, their struggles, and their hopes. Emily listened, offered guidance, and sometimes simply held their hands in silent solidarity. She understood that empathy was a language stronger than any speech. Meanwhile, her own daughters thrived in the environment she and Daniel had cultivated. She made sure they knew their mother's story, not to dwell in the past, but to instill resilience. They were raised to value self-respect, education, and integrity. They watched their mother's example daily, a woman who had endured, learned, and transformed. Emily also made a point to support other women financially and strategically. She funded microloans for small business initiatives started by women who were trying to stand on their own. And she invested in educational programs that encouraged girls to pursue careers in leadership and entrepreneurship. Her life became a cycle of giving, learning, and growing. Every act of generosity was a declaration that pain, when met with courage and purpose, could be transformed into empowerment for others. And yet, Emily never forgot the personal peace she had fought so hard to achieve. She and Daniel made time for quiet nights together, simple dinners, and walks in the park. They laughed, sometimes reminisced, but rarely spoke of the past. Emily had learned that true liberation lay not in revisiting old wounds, but in living fully in the present. One evening, at a conference in a bustling city far from home, Emily stood before an audience of thousands. The room was quiet, anticipation thick in the air. She began speaking softly, letting her story unfold naturally. I once believed that my life would always be defined by someone else's choices, she said. I invested my time, my money, and my heart into someone who did not value me. But life has a way of teaching us what we need to know at exactly the right moment. It taught me that my worth is not dependent on approval, nor my happiness contingent upon someone else's behavior. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Today, she continued, I stand not because I sought revenge, but because I chose to rise. And in rising, I realized something important. The highest form of strength is not in breaking others, but in nurturing ourselves and helping others rise alongside us. Every woman here has that power. Every woman here has a story that can inspire, that can change lives, that can leave a legacy. Her words resonated long after she left the stage. Women approached her, some with tears, some with hopeful smiles, all with gratitude for her courage and authenticity. Emily knew that her story had transcended personal triumph. It had become a beacon. Back at Nourish, she often reflected quietly on her journey. She remembered the betrayal, the pain, and the long nights of uncertainty. But more than that, she remembered the moment she decided not to be broken. The moment she decided to reclaim her voice, and the countless lives that had been touched since. Emily often repeated a mantra to herself and to others. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is to live a life so full, so successful, and so peaceful that those who tried to break you become merely a forgotten chapter in your story. With each passing day, Emily's legacy grew, not through wealth or recognition, but through impact. Through every woman she helped rise, through every daughter who learned her example, through every meal served at Nourish, Emily's story continued to unfold, vibrant and enduring. And so, in the warmth of her restaurant, surrounded by the laughter of children and the voices of empowered women, Emily Roberts thrived, not as a victim of her past, but as a living testament to resilience, purpose, and the power of inspiring others. Her life had become a masterpiece of courage and compassion, a story that would continue to shine long after the wounds of yesterday had faded. Years had passed since Emily had faced Mark for the last time. The echoes of her past, once loud and painful, had softened into lessons, guiding her with clarity and purpose. Her life was no longer about survival. It was about fulfillment, influence, and the quiet power of making a difference in others' lives. Nourish had become more than a restaurant. It was a community hub, a place where women, children, and families came to connect, learn, and feel seen. Emily expanded her workshops, offering courses on financial literacy, emotional resilience, and entrepreneurial skills. She often invited guest speakers, women who had endured personal and professional hardships, to share their insights. Every session was a celebration of survival and reinvention, a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. Emily's daughters, now growing into bright and confident young girls, mirrored their mother's values: courage, integrity, and compassion. Emily made it a point to teach them the power of standing tall in the face of adversity and living life unapologetically. She encouraged them to chase dreams without fear and to view setbacks as stepping stones rather than barriers. Meanwhile, Emily's reach as a motivational speaker expanded internationally. She spoke at conferences, universities, and community events, her narrative resonating with women across cultures. She shared the story of her betrayal, the financial and emotional ruin she had endured, and the painstaking journey of reclaiming her identity. But the focus was never revenge. It was empowerment. True victory, she would tell her audiences, lies in building a life so complete and so peaceful that those who tried to break you become only a footnote in your story. The $400,000 she had received from Mark's transferred assets had long been distributed to organizations helping women rebuild their lives. This act of generosity became a pivotal part of her legacy, one that spoke louder than any words. Emily had learned that wealth, when combined with purpose, could create enduring change. She had turned the remnants of betrayal into foundations of hope for countless others. Daniel, her partner in life, celebrated every success with quiet support. Their love had grown stronger through shared victories and challenges. They traveled together to attend speaking engagements, community programs, and humanitarian projects. Yet, amid the growing responsibilities, they always prioritized home, family, and small moments of joy. Quiet dinners, early morning walks, and laughter-filled weekends with their daughters. One sunny afternoon, Emily was invited to speak at an international women's empowerment summit. Thousands gathered to hear her, the energy in the auditorium electric. She stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding yet warm, and began. Every woman here has faced challenges that tested her spirit. Some of us were betrayed. Some of us were underestimated. Some of us were made to believe we weren't enough. But I stand before you today not as a victim of my past, but as proof that the human spirit is resilient. You have the power to rise, to rebuild, and to redefine what it means to live fully. Her words were met with thunderous applause. Women wept, smiled, and embraced each other, inspired by the story of Emily's courage. Yet her message remained grounded in humility. The journey of empowerment was ongoing, ever evolving, and meant to be shared. Back home, Nourish continued to thrive. Emily implemented mentorship programs, connecting young women with experienced professionals. She created scholarship funds for aspiring entrepreneurs and hosted retreats focused on healing and leadership. Each initiative was designed to leave a lasting impact, a ripple effect of empowerment extending far beyond the walls of her restaurant. Emily often reflected on the twists of her life, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the painstaking climb back to self-respect. What had once seemed insurmountable had become the foundation for her purpose. She had transformed pain into wisdom, adversity into opportunity, and betrayal into compassion. One evening, as she sat in her favorite corner of Nourish, watching her daughters play with other children, she felt a profound sense of peace. Daniel joined her, placing a gentle hand on hers. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. Emily smiled softly. "We've built something extraordinary," she corrected. "It's more than just me or us. It's every woman who dares to rise again, every life touched, every story heard." In that moment, she realized that her journey had come full circle. The once broken Emily Roberts had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope, and a living testament to the power of forgiveness, courage, and self-belief. Her story, she knew, would endure, not because of the trials she faced, but because of how she chose to rise above them. And as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Emily whispered to herself, "Content and unwavering." Sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating those who hurt us, but in living a life so full of honor, love, and peace that our story becomes a legacy worth remembering. Emily Roberts had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her joy, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations of women to rise, rebuild, and flourish. Comment what you want to hear next and also tell us what the story should be like. Until then, take care of yourself and have a nice day.